After 60, a lot of conversations about the brain start to sound the same. You're forgetting names? That's normal at your age. You walked into a room and forgot why? Welcome to the club. Maybe someone suggested a crossword app, a little more sleep, some omega-3s, or magnesium at night. And those things can help. But under all that advice, there is usually a quiet, heavy sentence. This is just how your brain goes now. You can slow it a little, but you can't do much else. If you've ever sat in a urologist's office, the conversation often starts somewhere else entirely. Nighttime trips to the bathroom, urgency, leaks, changes in confidence when you are out of the house or with your partner. And then, almost unexpectedly, you hear something about the brain. About how bladder control and mental clarity are more connected than most people think. About how the circuits that talk to your bladder run through the same control center that manages your attention, your planning, your memory. Some urologists and geriatric specialists are quietly pointing to a surprising conclusion. If you want a calmer bladder and a sharper brain after 60, you cannot ignore what is happening in your nervous system and in your nutrition. That's where this forgotten vitamin comes in. It is not new, it is not exotic. It has been in biology textbooks for years. But almost no one talks about it outside research circles. Most multivitamins barely include it or skip it completely. Most routine blood panels don't measure it. And yet, most adults do not reach the recommended intake, especially after midlife. It is deeply involved in memory, focus, mood, nerve signals, muscle control, and yes, the way your brain and bladder talk to each other. In this video, I want to guide you through that story. Not as a doctor, but as someone who translates what specialists in brain health and urology have been seeing. My goal is simple. By the end, you'll understand what this forgotten vitamin is, why your brain loves it after 60, why almost no one takes it in enough amounts, and how you can start using it intelligently, without extremes, as part of a bigger plan to protect your mind, your independence, and your intimate confidence. First, let's bring the problem into focus. After 60, many people describe the same clusters of symptoms, even if they never say them out loud altogether. Little memory slips that feel bigger than they used to. Losing the thread of a conversation halfway through a sentence. Struggling to find a simple word you know. Walking into a room and staring for a moment, trying to remember why you came. Feeling mentally foggy in the afternoons, as if your thoughts were moving through syrup instead of clear water. At the same time, another set of changes appears lower in the body. Urgency on the way to the bathroom. Waking once, twice, 3 times at night to pee. A weaker stream. Needing to plan your day around the availability of bathrooms. For some, a quiet fear of leaks when laughing, coughing, or walking longer distances. You might think these are totally separate issues. Brain stuff and urology stuff. But to the specialists who see thousands of older adults, they are often two sides of the same coin. The aging of the nervous system and the tiny communication errors between the brain and the organs it controls. Think for a second about what your brain is trying to do every day. It has to keep you oriented in time and place. It has to manage your attention, decide what matters and what you can ignore. It has to keep your mood steady enough for you to function. It has to coordinate your muscles so that you stand, walk, and turn without falling. And it has to constantly monitor signals from your bladder, your blood pressure, your heart, your digestion, deciding what needs your attention now and what can wait. None of that is automatic magic. It depends on millions of tiny electrical signals, traveling along nerves, being translated into chemical messages between brain cells. Those chemical messages are called neurotransmitters. One of the most important for memory, attention, and muscle control is acetylcholine. When you learn something new, when you focus on a conversation, when you move your legs on purpose, when you hold urine in or release it at the right moment, acetylcholine is involved. Levels of acetylcholine naturally decline with age. They are often lower than normal in people with age-related memory loss and in those with certain forms of dementia. That decline is part of why specialists are so interested in the raw material your body uses to make acetylcholine. That raw material is the forgotten vitamin of this video: choline. Choline is technically an essential nutrient, often grouped with the B vitamin family. Your body uses it for 3 big jobs that matter deeply after 60. First, it is the main building block for acetylcholine, that neurotransmitter that supports memory, attention, muscle control, and the signals between your brain and your bladder. Second, it is a key ingredient in the phospholipids that make up your cell membranes, including neurons in your brain. Those membranes are like the skin of each cell, deciding what goes in, what comes out, and how signals are transmitted. Third, choline participates in methylation reactions, helping regulate homocysteine levels, which are linked to blood vessel health, including the vessels that feed your brain. Here's the problem. Your body can make a little choline on its own, but not enough. You have to bring the rest from food or supplements. And when researchers look at what people actually eat, they find something striking. Most adults do not reach the adequate intake levels set by health authorities. In some analyses, around 9 out of 10 people fall short. It doesn't mean everyone is in a state of severe deficiency, but it does mean that a large part of the population is living with less choline than their brain and nervous system might ideally want, especially as they age. Why does almost no one take it seriously? There are several reasons. First, choline is not marketed with the same intensity as more famous nutrients like vitamin D, magnesium, or omega-3. Second, the foods richest in choline, like egg yolks and organ meats, have been avoided for years by many people because of fears about cholesterol, even though views on dietary cholesterol have evolved. Third, most basic multivitamins contain little or no choline. You could be doing everything right with a standard supplement and still not touch this nutrient in any meaningful way. So it quietly falls through the cracks, even though it sits at the heart of memory, attention, and nerve muscle communication. Now, why would a urologist, of all specialists, care about a brain nutrient like choline? Because the bladder and the brain are in constant conversation, and acetylcholine is one of the main languages they use. The nerves that tell your bladder to contract and relax, the circuits that allow you to feel fullness and delay urination until you reach a bathroom, the reflexes that protect you from leaks when you cough or laugh, all involve acetylcholine at some level. When the brain's ability to manage these signals is compromised, urinary symptoms often appear or worsen. That is one reason why urinary changes sometimes appear alongside cognitive changes in older adults. Of course, choline is not a magic fix for bladder problems, and too much acetylcholine in the wrong place is also not helpful. But when urologists and geriatricians look at the big picture, they see a pattern. Sleep, broken by nighttime urination, daytime fatigue, brain fog, subtle memory slips, and a diet low in key nutrients for the brain-bladder axis. Many are beginning to emphasize that if you want to protect your continence, your balance, and your confidence, you must also protect your brain. And supporting healthy choline status is one practical, often overlooked way to do that. Let's look a little deeper at what choline does inside your brain after 60. Remember that acetylcholine is heavily involved in forming and retrieving memories. When you meet someone and lock their name in your mind, when you remember where you parked the car, when you recall a recipe or the steps of a task, acetylcholine is part of the process. research suggests that maintaining adequate choline intake supports acetylcholine production and may help preserve certain aspects of cognitive function, especially verbal memory and processing. Some studies in older adults have found that people who consume more choline-rich foods, like eggs, tend to perform better on memory tests than those who consume less. Choline also contributes to the structural health of your neurons. The outer layer of every brain cell is made largely of phospholipids, such as phosphatidylcholine. You can think of these as flexible bricks in a wall that must be both sturdy and dynamic. Healthy membranes allow electrical signals to travel smoothly, receptors to work correctly, and cells to communicate efficiently. With age, oxidative stress and other factors can damage these structures. Having enough choline in your diet helps your body repair and renew them. It is like making sure your house has a steady supply of good building materials instead of patching the walls with whatever you can find. There is another, quieter way choline supports your brain, by helping regulate homocysteine through its role in methylation. Homocysteine is a compound in your blood that, when elevated, is associated with higher risks of vascular problems, including those that affect the small vessels in the brain. Choline, along with folate and other B vitamins, helps keep homocysteine in check. That doesn't mean taking choline automatically prevents disease, but it does mean it participates in maintaining a more protective environment for brain blood flow. So how does all of this feel in real life when choline intake is low? The signs are not dramatic like a broken bone. They are subtle and easy to blame on just aging. You may feel mentally slower, especially later in the day. You may struggle more with word finding, names, and recent events. Your concentration may fade faster when reading or watching something complex. You might feel more easily overwhelmed by multiple tasks. For some people, mood becomes more fragile. Small frustrations hit harder. Anxiety about bladder control, about falls, about forgetting, amplifies everything. It becomes harder to feel calm and present with others because part of your mind is always monitoring what might go wrong. Now picture what happens when you begin to close that choline gap as part of a larger plan that includes movement, sleep, and other nutrients. The change is not overnight, but over weeks and months, many people describe a shift. Thoughts feel a little cleaner. Recall comes a bit faster. They still misplace their keys sometimes, but they feel less like a stranger in their own mind. They can follow a conversation in a noisy room more easily. They feel less mentally wobbly when tired. Urinary symptoms that were aggravated by constant stress and shallow sleep often feel easier to handle when the brain is not constantly running on fumes. The natural question is, if this nutrient is so important, where do you get it? And why is almost no one reaching the recommended intake? The richest sources of choline are foods like egg yolks, liver, certain meats, fish, and some beans and soy products. One large egg can easily provide a significant portion of your daily needs. Yet for decades, many people were told to throw away the yolk and eat only the whites to avoid cholesterol. Others reduced meat and egg intake without adding other choline-rich foods. Plant-based diets can absolutely be healthy, but unless they are carefully planned with soy, legumes, and fortified foods, choline intake can slide even lower. Surveys in different countries show that typical adult choline intakes often hover around 250 to 350 milligrams per day, while adequate intake values for older adults are generally set in the 400 to 550 milligram range, depending on sex and local guidelines. In other words, many people are living in a gray area, not catastrophically deficient, but not fully meeting the amounts their biology might prefer. At the same time, supplement surveys show that choline from pills contributes only a very small slice of total intake in most populations. Most multivitamins either don't contain it or include only a token amount. That doesn't mean you should rush out and buy a giant choline supplement and start swallowing handfuls. Like all nutrients, choline has a sweet spot. Extremely high doses can cause side effects like low blood pressure, sweating, fishy body odor, or digestive upset in some people. If you have certain medical conditions, such as kidney or liver disease, or if you are on specific medications, any change in supplements should be guided by your healthcare provider. But it does mean that, for many people, there is room to increase choline intake gently and intelligently, starting with food, and, if needed, considering modest supplemental forms under supervision. So what might that look like in everyday life after 60? Imagine your current breakfast. Maybe it is just coffee and a piece of toast or cereal with low-fat milk. That kind of meal brings almost no choline. Now imagine a different version. A couple of whole eggs, perhaps scrambled with some spinach, or a vegetable omelet made with one whole egg and some extra egg whites if you like, plus a small portion of fruit. Suddenly, you are giving your brain a meaningful dose of choline at the very start of the day, along with protein, B vitamins, and other micronutrients. If you prefer not to eat eggs, you might choose tofu scramble or a bowl of beans with whole grains and a sprinkle of nutritional yeast, and later in the day include fish or poultry. At lunch and dinner, you can build in further choline by including foods like fish, chicken, turkey, beef in reasonable portions, or soy products and beans if you eat plant-based. Some cruciferous vegetables and nuts contribute smaller amounts. The goal is not to obsessively count milligrams, but to understand that choline-aware meals tend to include whole eggs, quality protein, and a variety of plant foods, rather than relying only on refined grains and snacks. If, after looking at your pattern, you and your healthcare provider agree that it is still difficult to reach a reasonable intake, you might consider a supplement that provides choline in forms like phosphatidylcholine, citicoline, or choline bitartrate at a dose appropriate for your situation. Now let's bring this back to the urologist's chair for a moment, because that is where our title began. Picture an older adult who comes in because they are waking 3 or 4 times a night to use the bathroom. The urologist evaluates the bladder, the prostate or pelvic floor, the medications, but they also ask about sleep, mood, memory, and daytime function. They know that when the brain is exhausted, when neurotransmitters are out of balance, when attention and control are frayed, the bladder often misbehaves. They also know that broken sleep, especially due to nocturia, can accelerate cognitive decline by constantly interrupting the deep phases of sleep where the brain flushes waste and consolidates memory. In that context, a nutrient like choline becomes part of a much larger strategy: improve sleep depth, support brain repair at night, strengthen the circuits that handle attention and control, and, alongside other treatments, reduce the chaos that makes urinary symptoms worse. It is not about claiming that choline cures bladder problems. It is about acknowledging that your brain and your bladder are on the same team, and that feeding your nervous system well is one way to support that team. To make all of this less abstract, imagine a few stories. Think of a man in his late 60s who has started to notice that he loses his train of thought more often, misplaces objects, and wakes twice a night to pee. He has reduced eggs for years due to old cholesterol advice and eats a very light breakfast. After discussing things with his doctor and a nutrition professional, he begins eating 1 or 2 whole eggs most mornings, adds more fish and beans during the week, and later introduces a modest choline supplement in the form of phosphatidylcholine. At the same time, he works on his sleep routine and follows urology advice for fluid timing. Several months later, he still has occasional lapses, but he describes his mind as less foggy. He wakes once a night instead of 3 times. His bladder issues are not gone, but they are easier to live with. Most importantly, he feels that his brain is responding to his efforts rather than sliding away from him. Now imagine a woman in her early 70s who follows a mostly plant-based diet, avoids eggs, and has begun to feel both mentally and emotionally flat. She is also dealing with urgency and occasional leaks when she laughs or sneezes, which makes her feel embarrassed and less social. Her doctor checks her B vitamins, thyroid, and other basic markers. Together with a dietitian, they review her intake and realize that choline is extremely low. They adjust her meals to include tofu, tempeh, beans, and, after careful consideration of her ethics and preferences, she decides to reintroduce eggs a few times a week. In addition, they agree on a small choline supplement and exercises to strengthen the pelvic floor. Over time, she notices that she can follow conversations more easily, feels more like herself emotionally, and experiences a bit more control in her bladder. Her life does not become perfect, but it feels less like a story of constant loss. Think also of a couple in their mid-60s who are both worried about brain aging. One partner has a family history of dementia, the other struggles with nighttime urgency. They decide to approach this as a team. Together, they choose to build choline-rich meals around eggs, fish, beans, and whole foods, instead of just cutting calories or following random internet diets. They talk with their doctors about whether a moderate choline supplement fits their overall plan. They work on walking more, doing simple leg and balance exercises, and creating a sleep environment that lets their brains enter deep rest. Months later, they still notice signs of aging here and there, but they also notice something else. They can plan trips with more confidence, enjoy conversations without feeling constantly lost, and feel more at home in their bodies. The forgotten vitamin has become a quiet part of their shared strategy. Not a miracle, but a tool. Finally, picture an older adult in their late 70s who has already been told they are frail. They move slowly, nap often, and their family worries about their memory. They also have chronic urinary symptoms. A geriatrician looks beyond the labels and checks something simple: their food pattern, their vitamin D, their B12, and their intake of choline. The picture reveals low protein, scarce eggs or legumes, and almost no choline-rich foods. The care team introduces small, manageable changes: a daily protein-rich breakfast with choline sources, gentle strength training in a chair, a discussion about whether a low-dose choline supplement is appropriate, and adjustments to urologic treatment. Over time, their walking speed improves slightly, they participate more in conversations, and nighttime is less chaotic. Again, choline is not the only factor, but it is one that was missing and is now quietly supporting the rest. If you decide to explore this in your own life, there are a few important guardrails. First, do not self-diagnose serious conditions. Memory loss, confusion, mood changes, new urinary symptoms, or sudden changes in balance always deserve a proper evaluation. Choline is not a substitute for that. Second, do not assume that if a little is good, a lot must be better. Nutrients live in balance with one another. Very large doses of choline without supervision are not wise. Third, if you take medications, especially for mood, blood pressure, liver, kidney, or clotting issues, talk with your healthcare provider before adding any supplement. What you can absolutely do, starting very soon, is look at your plate with new eyes. Ask yourself simple questions. Do I give my brain and nerves any choline in the morning? Have I been avoiding the foods that naturally contain it without replacing them with other sources? Could I build one new breakfast or lunch this week that clearly includes a choline-rich food? You can also ask more direct questions at your next appointment. Does my current diet cover nutrients like choline? Is there any reason I should avoid a modest choline supplement? How does this fit with my bladder issues and my cognitive goals? If I had to compress everything we have talked about into a single sentence, it would be this. After 60, your brain and your bladder are still listening. And one of the clearest, most forgotten ways to support both is to give your body enough choline, the quiet vitamin-like nutrient that almost no one is eating or supplementing in adequate amounts. Aging does not mean surrendering your mind or your confidence to automatic decline. It means your biology asks for more precision and more care. Movement, good sleep, emotional support, meaningful relationships, and a balanced diet all matter. Within that diet, choline is one of those small, powerful details that can tilt the trajectory a few degrees in your favor if you respect it. You don't need perfection. You need awareness and consistency. As you finish this video, I invite you to take one small, concrete step. It could be as simple as planning a breakfast with whole eggs tomorrow, or writing down questions about choline to bring to your doctor, or looking at your multivitamin label and noticing whether this nutrient is even there. And if you know someone over 60 who is quietly worried about their memory, their bladder, or their independence, consider sharing this message with them, not to scare them, but to remind them that, even now, there are levers they can still move. If you want to keep exploring natural, science-backed ways to protect your brain, your urinary health, and your vitality in maturity, you can subscribe and stay close to this space. Your brain has not stopped listening. The story of how you age is still being written, one small, intelligent choice at a time.